Why am I getting David twice? What's up with that?
It's a treat for all senses.
Some people dream of this day.
That's true.
Very few, but some.
Like, what about now? Are you getting him twice now?
No, now I have the two of you and David.
Two very similar looking men.
Yeah. Two men and a baby.
There's a.
2 Men and a Baby. This is my new podcast, 2 Men and a Baby.
This has a menorah on it.
There's a lot to unpack here. Holding a baby, getting drunk with a menorah.
Hang on a minute.
Wow, a Star Wars podcast.
Oh, this is fun. Do we record this part?
All right, and hang on. I will be right back.
Wait, why did he leave? Is this part of it? Seems ill-timed.
That's not a bit. That's just so funny to me. That's the most right thing of all time. Okay, we're going. I'll be right back.
Right.
I'll be right back. No, we should probably talk about. You can ask that while we wait for Rye. While I look at these topics.
I'm back. I don't want to.
All right. Well, now that we have been recording for 40 minutes about complete and utter nonsense.
First of all, we've been recording for 11 minutes. It took you 30 minutes to get the tech set up because you didn't think far enough ahead.
Yeah,
so
but
it's
been recording the whole time. So
stones in glass houses, Darth, is all I'm saying. Just be careful where you point your accusations.
Welcome to another episode of That One Scene, where we go through and analyze one specific scene of Star Wars and try to figure out what makes it tick. We've got E.S. Anderson joining me, and a little baby. He brought a baby.
I brought a baby.
And then we've got Ryebold, who has lost his camera, so he's off screen.
Hello there.
And the saluting man is DC McNeill.
Hello. I did not bring a baby. I was not advised that was a requirement.
Maybe next time.
And now I feel like, I feel like I did something wrong. This was not in my writer contract that I had to bring a baby. I just want to put that out there on Front Street. I will accept no liability for a lack of baby. Thank you very much.
I'm saying if you bring a baby next time, we can have a baby battle. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it wouldn't really be much of a contest, but we could. So.
They build them different in Australia.
He's not entertained at all by this, so.
Or he would be scared because it's a really intimidating, Australian babies, man, that, built out of different stuff, let me tell you. They're fighting snakes, they're wrestling crocodiles from a young age, okay?
When you come out and the spiders are as big as you are, then you've just got to be prepared.
I don't know if there's a quick story, but it is also horrifying. If you're in some way arachnophobic, skip ahead a little bit. But when I was a child, my mother left me sleeping under a tree while she went to grab something from the car, and she came back, and there was like a dinner plate sized huntsman on my face, and it bit me and then left, and all I'm saying is I feel like my arachnophobia is fully justified.
Yeah.
I would say
you know
so.
what I'm saying? Yeah. Like I feel like anyone.
That's beyond primal.
Yeah.
That's like hard coded.
When I was in high school, when I was working as a chef, I woke up one morning and I had this like weird bite on my arm, and I was like, that's weird. Like, I don't know what that, it's unusual. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And I went to the doctor and he was like, how did you get bitten by like this incredibly rare, dangerous spider? And I was like, I have no memory of this moment. And it didn't give me radioactive powers. It just sent me to the fucking hospital. So,
we were really misled in our youth. Yeah, I was.
Totally. Yeah. Sorry for saying an F in the first 2 minutes, Darth. You'll have to believe that.
You're a better man. You're a better man than me. If that had happened to me, where they were like, or where I was like, "What is this?" and they were like, "That's from an incredibly rare, dangerous spider," I'd be like, "Okay, well, I'm not going ever in there ever again. Let's just burn it down."
I've quit my job. I have moved. Yes.
Yeah.
We did. I did legitimately move. Right. I was like, I'm not living here anymore, because it was the house where we lived had this big. It wasn't even a backyard. It was like there's no other way to describe it. It was a kind of a shrubby forest kind of big sweeping garden that kind of like tumbled down into this big yard. And we used to get like brown snakes. We'd get all kinds of huntsmen, because this was right by the river as well. We were about 2 or 3 blocks away from the Brisbane River. And so, you'd get like giant spiders, you'd get snakes. and all the bush turkeys would build all their big bush turkey mounds, and all the snakes would live in the bush turkey mounds to like eat the eggs and stuff. It was a real nightmare. Australia is just not good.
Just awful.
Yeah, it's the reason I live in the third floor of an apartment building now.
Beaches are full of riptides and sharks. It's just a mess.
I haven't thought of this story in years, but I had a neighbor who was from Kenya, and where they lived, they slept in hammocks with mosquito netting around it because the mosquitoes there were so awful. And he had 3 older brothers. And one night, as he was sleeping, he was a kid, probably 6 or 7, his older brothers filled a bucket of frogs, and as he was sleeping, poured the frogs into his hammock. And because of the mosquito netting, they couldn't get out. And he moved to America. So...
yeah, well, because then he could get a handgun and deal with it. You know what I'm saying? Fucking hell. That's,
I have no problem with frogs, but that story gives me frogophobia. Like, that's a lot.
Anything that moves quickly and is small, I can't deal with. Like...
You need to be able to punch it solidly. Like,
I need to be able to see it and like tackle it, right? Like where I do my morning run, very frequently, not very frequently, maybe like once every month, I will see a snake, and I'm just the other way. Is like my run speed triples, and my app is like, this is not the high intensity part of your run. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. I'm getting out of here. Like, I am gone. You don't even know about it. I'm across the other side of the freaking creek. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's no thank you.
Whenever my kids visit, his watch keeps telling him he's stressed out.
My Fitbit.
Is it doing like the heart rate is elevated?
Like, are you exercising? What's going on? No, I'm just trying to settle this argument.
I feel like that my phone does that when I'm like playing a particularly stressful video game, where it's like, you should stand up and walk around because your heart rate is really elevated. I'm like, yeah, it's probably true. Yeah. But some kid is destroying me in FIFA. Like,
he's only 11.
Some 13-year-old's kicking my ass. Darth, what are we talking about?
We're talking about everything. So the initial premise of this talk was to look at how the First Order rose to power compared to how Palpatine rose to power, because his rise was completely political machinations. And the First Order, they just straight up blew up the Senate. Like, there was nothing subtle about it. But even before they could get to that stage, apparently there was, like, the First Order rose from the remnants of the Imperials, and apparently the Senate had some kind of agreement with them that's like, we're not going to go to battle against you if you like quit attacking. So there was like a peace agreement, and it was this peace agreement that was the reason that Leia formed the resistance from outside of the government, because the government couldn't legally do anything against this rising regime. And so the regime was allowed to grow to the point where they could develop a superstar laser that would then be able to blow up the entire Senate. So there's a lot of weird, like, political stuff that is intermixed with just brute force, taking over. And it's just so different than how Palpatine did it. And I'm like, how much of this was intentionally doing it different? How much was just like stupid writing, lazy writing, or not thinking far enough ahead because everything was so rushed in production? And since this is politically in a political vein, I figured that David would go for 30 minutes on it. So start your clocks.
So before he does that, can I expand on or clarify a few things that are in the history of the First Order?
Please do.
Yes, please do, because me and Rye have both read Bloodlines, which I think is really relevant to this conversation.
Yes. So Bloodlines is one of the...
I just hated it.
Yeah. So you have to ignore half of that story.
Yes,
half of that story is not good.
No, let me rephrase. Me and Rye have some semblance of taste, so we read and enjoyed Bloodlines. Rye, go for it.
Okay. So the first thing, and I've heard a number of people say this before, is that really what the sequel trilogy should have been is essentially the rise of the First Order. That is a much more interesting thing than what we actually got. or actually there's like a trilogy's worth of material that happens and to lead to where we start in The Force Awakens. But Bloodline is one of the big missing pieces in how we get to where we start in The Force Awakens. And one of the big things in there is that you have essentially the New Republic, which is weak and a joke. You see that in Mando as well. And they essentially divide into two different camps of political thought. One of which is the centrists who want a very strong centralized republic, and then you have all of the I forget what they're called, but they want everything. They think about it like states' rights. They want everything to be controlled by local planets, and they do not want a strong central government, which makes sense. That is kind of a reaction that you would expect following the downfall of Palpatine and his empire. But what happens at the end of Bloodline is essentially the First Order forms at that point. Is that you have a bunch of planets, some of which are very important to how we get the First Order that we do in The Force Awakens. The planet with the immense shipyards, the name escapes me at this moment. Maybe Darth can think of it, but it's there is a planet that is known for its shipyards. It's where like the Imperial Navy's built.
It's like a Sluice Vaughn or something like that.
Not like that. It's I can look it up when David's talking, but essentially think about it. This is one of those planets, and it's very important to the galaxy. And that is one of the planets that is like, we're going to go with the First Order. So there's essentially a split between the New Republic and the First Order. The First Order isn't out there beyond reach or in like the unknown part of the galaxy, and nobody knows what's going on with them. They have some very important core planets that have joined them, and they are a known quantity. But yeah, Leia doing the whole resistance thing. I think that's a different discussion. But that is essentially how we get to where the First Order that we do is you have some very important planets that split off from the New Republic, and they join with these Imperial remnants that have survived.
It's also really interesting. Like before we really dig into it, like that's happening now with what the current administration is trying to do in America, where they, from what I've been able to tell, they are trying to strip away as many federal rights and return as many of those rights to the individual states as possible. And part of me keeps thinking like it is so similar to a lot of the stuff that we see in Star Wars and like literally what Rye just said. But is that really better or not? Because like I think they were talking about dismantling the entire like federal education system in favor of the states doing it themselves. And I'm like, is that really better? And these planets, like, it's okay to say we don't want to be part of your whole, the whole galactic senate or whatever. But then if your planet is a poor planet, you don't have somebody watching out for you. I don't know.
Oh.
So I think that was everything that I wanted to say to allow David to give us a 30-minute TED Talk on politics.
I went to look at the big shipyard planets for shipyards or planets with major shipyards. And all of these names look like absolute nonsense. And I didn't recognize any of them. But it does say that, like, Defondor was one, Hast. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the planet you're thinking of, Rye. But certainly Raxus Prime. I don't know what the planet was. But, well,
Kuat.
I guess
Kuat. It's Kuat.
Kuat, okay. I guess two things that are interesting to think about in comparison with Palpatine. When Palpatine's project is ongoing throughout the kind of galaxy, he is basically sending out Jedi and different people and emissaries and things like that to press different planets and different systems into joining the Republic, right? The Republic's project is very similar to the American expansionism efforts that kind of follow the Civil War in a lot of ways. And I think where the First Order differs in that regard is, particularly in the Clone Wars TV show, you get a lot of texture to the reasons why different planets don't want to join the Republic, right? To the point where Anakin, being just the complete himbo that he is, the head empty, sexy man that he is, will very frequently have conversations with people where he's completely incapable of understanding their viewpoint of why maybe the Republic isn't a good fit for them. And ultimately, of course, through means of force or through means of persuasion or through means of, kind of video game logic where it's like, well, if you do a quest for me, I will join your faction, that type of thing, because it's a kid show. Through all kinds of different means, you end up having different people join the Republic through that way. And to what you were talking about, Darth, some of those we consider to be machinations where he engineers a conflict or he engineers the outcome of a conflict, or quite a lot of the time Sheev's an opportunist where an opportunity arises and he throws resources at it in such a way that he doesn't lose either way. He's very, very good at that, particularly in that TV show. I think perhaps the difference with the First Order, as I understand it, is in the same way that the Rebel Alliance, or whatever they call themselves, the Rebels, I guess, in the sequel trilogy and the extant material around it, in the same way they have to form themselves outside of the law because of this peace agreement they have, which we see a lot in Bloodline. So too, the First Order doesn't necessarily have to, and is able to reuse the mechanisms of Palpatine in some ways, right? Not directly, but they're able to basically do the same thing, which is, they're able to start collapsing and removing regulation and centralizing power and centralizing wealth, and just like gradually, slowly moving to this kind of neo-imperialist military machine that then, eventually the goal is to bleed into fascism, right? We see this as a pretty common pattern throughout history. I think where I struggle with the First Order is, unlike in the kind of original trilogy and the prequels, they're not really cognizant of the political moment that they're in and that they're commenting on, right? We talk a lot about the prequels as Lucas being very, very conscious of Iraq and Bush Jr. too, and all of the different ways that America is kind of being made into a demagoguery and made into this kind of military machine. And, this film's essentially about that. And, through different mechanisms like trade embargoes and stuff like that, timely, right? You think about a lot of those examples, a lot of the same mechanisms are being used and deployed now by the US, but in increasingly ineffective ways because they lack the understanding of how those things are deployed successfully. And so I think, unlike Palpatine, who's able to pick and choose his opportunities correctly, my understanding of the First Order is they basically just do what the current, kind of fascistic movement in America is doing, which is flood the zone, where it's just do as many things as you can as badly, like do as many bad things as you can as quickly as possible so no one can focus in on any one thing. And then that'll give us time to build this big gun that we can use to just explode stuff. Like it understands some of what it's doing, but then it has to reach for this, it has to do Death Star again, instead of I guess what you would, and do Death Star again to blow up the government instead of what I think the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy seems to comprehend pretty extensively, which is actually it's more effective to infiltrate those systems, remove all of the things that make them function as those systems, and then retain that system in aesthetic only, right? If you can infiltrate the government, remove all the regulations, and do things like, I don't know, for example, label yourself a socialist party when you're a fascist movement. That is a really effective aesthetic maneuver. And I think, to my money, I don't know, blowing up making a big planet that blows up the literal government. It's just I think that's just bad writing. Unless you have an angle, right now, say what you will, Batman v Superman is a bad movie, but having Superman go to a courthouse and then having it be blown up, that's doing something and thinking about and it tries to do something with that. Fails in spectacular fashion, but it has an angle, and I just don't know that what we get in the films is enough to give us that angle. Obviously, Bloodline, I think there's a lot of stuff in that that's interesting, but I guess at a baseline, that would be my general schematic overview of the difference between Palpatine and then what we get with the First Order, which we all, of course, know is Snoke, but then Snoke is actually Palpatine guy.
Palpatine clone. Badly done.
Is he a clone? I thought it was just like his 2IC.
I don't know if they. I mean, maybe it's in the novel that they like officially said whether he's supposed to be a failed clone or not. There were like test tubes of him in episode 9 that we saw.
Yeah, you see tons of Snokes as you go down the line, and then we find the actual Palpatine, and then we find out that Rey is the daughter of one of the clones, we are supposed to assume.
But then her dad was a failed clone, and he is a totally normal-looking human being.
Yeah, he failed because he was a nice guy. And
what?
Yeah.
So hang on, what do we?
You're bleeding into a different discussion, right?
Well, yeah, like
we totally are.
First of all, what? Second of all, huh? And third of all, I don't remember any of that. But yeah. Third of all, fuck off.
Well, yeah, that's the Wednesday talk with Sam actually.
Yeah, Rye, you've got a much better grasp of the prequel era than I do, because you've obviously thought about a lot more of what would make it work. And I think you talked a lot about the idea of the Cold War style build-up of the First Order being a lot more interesting. Is that something that resonates with you when you think about, the prequel trilogy and how they kind of show that escalation? Were you imagining a kind of similar gradual escalation that we just don't get? Like, is that kind of where you think that stuff would work well?
In the prequel trilogy? Or are we talking about...
No, as in this, like, in the same way that the prequel trilogy, you get the slow way that Sidious builds up his power.
Okay.
You know?
Gotcha, yeah. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is as far as how they messed everything up with Star Wars, is that they really should have led off with a bunch of TV shows. They should have started with Mando and some other stuff, and then built a new audience for Star Wars, and then done a sequel trilogy. Because the big thing that they wanted to, this is a different discussion, but the big thing that they wanted when they were talking about let's get a new generation of fans or whatever, is they weren't talking about American kids. They were talking about the Chinese. And these movies did not land in China. There was no existing audience for them, and that's who they were after. And like, if you look at the first movie did pretty well. The second movie, or the rest of them, not so much. The Last Jedi didn't do very well at all, and The Rise of Skywalker was like barely a blip as far as people that went to go see it there. So that's what they were going for with that. But I think that would have, what we're talking about as far as escalation, if you did it the same way, would have worked very well in a TV show. And I could think of so many ways, especially reading Bloodline. I was thinking, I was like, this is exactly what I wanted, and this is exactly what we're missing, is that you have Leia going, there's this big threat out there, and we need to deal with it. And there's people like, and it's just like Don't Look Up, where like you would have people that do not want to acknowledge that there's this threat out there. It's essentially the lie and the ghost and all of that, is the lie that you're telling yourself, this isn't a threat, Leia, because if it is a threat, that's really scary, and we don't want to deal with that. So we're just going to pretend that. So she would run into all these roadblocks. She would try her best, as she does, and she would run into roadblocks and other obstacles that she would have to overcome, and eventually she fails at that. But it is the way that she does in Bloodline is the heroic failure that I always talk about, where she doesn't succeed at getting the New Republic to acknowledge that this is a problem. So she redirects and forms the resistance. And that is exactly what we expect our heroes to do. A lot of what's in Bloodline is the stuff that I wanted to see, where talking about the origin of the First Order, of you would have people, we talked about him before, Ransom Casturfo, who would want the formation of to go back to the Empire. Go, well, all right, it didn't. We had the wrong guy. We should.
Yeah,
but
Right.
You know?
That was his argument. It wasn't that it was a bad system. It was that we put the wrong guy in charge.
Exactly. Yeah.
Crazy.
So like you would have people like that. That is very real. And then what I was saying in that video where I talked the hunt for the Red Dreadnought or whatever, it was that like when we go into post Rise of Skywalker, I would very much expect to see a First Order type government or what is it, or force, whatever. Like that would come out of a system like that, because the galaxy would be pure chaos after Rise of Skywalker. So I could kind of see like you can totally see that would happen in before the Force Awakens. But the problem that we have without Bloodline and without all the other outside material with the Force Awakens is that everything just happens because of either incompetence or just because. And it's like, all right, well, so they blew up the Republic. Okay, but the Republic still has a navy, right? And it's like, no, they were all there. Because that's what you would do with the navy. You would keep it all right there. And then so it would be blown up with everything else. So this is a galaxy. They didn't have ships anywhere? No, they didn't. You know. Yeah,
well, they have a big parking lot, okay? And it's next to Parliament, which is where they keep all the famous people that are in politics. And it's not an obvious target, so don't even worry about it. It's a big white building.
Well, there's a different bit that's really interesting that I can't remember if we had talked about, that the only reason that it was on that planet that they blew up was because the Senate like rotates planets so that no one home planet like Coruscant could ever call it like the home of the government or ever, whatever. And then I'm like, well, what if it was at a different planet and it was somewhere different, and then would it not have been blown up? Like, was this a really strategic thing that the First Order just had to wait until it was on this specific planet?
Or was it a planet they already didn't like?
Yeah, that planet just got unlucky because it was Tuesday.
It's funny to imagine them. It's funny to imagine it like the Snoke just like not liking it, being like, fuck that planet. And then he blows it up and he's like, oh shit, wait, the government was on there this week? I thought that was next week. One thing that I just want to point out, the TV show Rise describing as Andor. Obviously, it's set during a different era, but Andor is just this, right? You get it from both sides of the fence. You get the building of the rebellion and what it takes to make a rebel. And then you get it from the other side, which is Dedra and the ICB?
I think that's
what's
right.
What's the info say? ISB. You get Dedra within the ISB dealing with the fact that like every other ISB agent is refusing to acknowledge that all of this stuff that they're seeing might be organized and that it might be like a rebel alliance, right? They are like in active denial, and she has to kind of push against the system in that way to figure out that there is a rebel alliance. And then you get kind of the corollary of that, which is when she does figure that out, it's like a problem that it's a problem that it's been figured out at all, because it's so much easier to pretend that it's not happening. And Andor is just that show because it is about process, and it's a Gilroy joint, so it's slow, and it's very much this happens, then this happens. It's all these constant escalations. And I wonder, I say this a lot about Luke Skywalker as a character. I would be very interested in them taking some of that material from the Zahn trilogy, not, Zahn, the actual content itself around Thrawn or anything like that, but certainly the type of character that Luke is in that, where he's basically a war hero that has no war, and he doesn't really have a place in society. I'd love a TV show that like looks at how does that fit into the world politics, because he just ends up being like a figurehead in a lot of those stories, and no one really gives him the time of day. And I think there is something interesting there to put that in contrast with, what that power vacuum looks like after the Return of the Jedi. And you could look at something similar with the end of Rise of Skywalker, with, God forbid, if you wanted to put Rey in another film, which they seem insistent on doing. I think there's room for that there.
I was thinking about Chronicles of Narnia. Prince Caspian story has a it's hundreds of years in the future after the events of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And you have this sect of dwarves and evil animals who are like, the White Witch wasn't so bad. We could totally go back to that. I don't really like the politics that's going on right now. Yeah, the White Witch, we could probably go back to that. And as a kid, I remember thinking that seems dumb.
It's realistic.
I'm like, oh, wait. Oh, okay.
I get it now.
Yeah, I get it.
I have bad news.
And then I also thought about, so there's a movie that came out 20 years ago, Valkyrie, Tom Cruise, which was all about a true story about people in Germany who didn't like what Hitler had going on, and they tried to assassinate him and then obviously failed. But really, like, cool story about how, like, it is not all one unified body of thought within any system. You have people inside who see what's happening and go, oh, I don't want this to happen at all. And what an interesting take, right? Like, and I know we have, like, as Palpatine is coming to power, we have just Padme in the Senate going, oh, this is how democracy dies, but what about everybody else? And I believe we're starting to delve into some of those other ideas, and I think that's a story, bless you, that is very interesting to tell. And as this sect also begins, these other orders and these other divisions, I find it really interesting when something very evil comes from something very well intended. Now, this was somebody that actually didn't like what Palpatine was doing, perhaps. And so they created their own sect. And just by means of having to be separate from everything else, maybe they had to become more and more violent until suddenly they became the very thing that they were trying to act against. And now they're the First Order, and they're the only thing that's left.
Well, that did describe that one dude. He was in the video game that we just went through. Saw Gerrera. Saw Gerrera.
Okay. Actually, Saw Gerrera is a really good example, right? He starts as, unless you want to explain it, Darth.
No, I'm getting feedback of myself, so I don't want to talk at all.
That seems so solvable.
Yeah, it's not on mobile that I've been able to discover, so just keep going.
Oh, surely you should. Anyway, whatever. That must be infuriating. You should type out what you want to say and just hand it to Eric. That Sorger is a really interesting character. You look at the way that he goes from a core part of you look at him in Andor, right? That's kind of like the height of his powers in some regards, where he has been a rebel for his entire life at that point, and he sees things so clearly, right? When Luthen goes to visit him for the first time, and he's like, "Oh, you're working with them? Like that sect? Like those aren't the guys. Like you're doing. Like I don't work with them anymore. Like this, I've determined that all of these other sects within this exercise are insufficient because they aren't willing to meet the world where it is." And then eventually, by the time you get to him in Rogue One, he has kind of gone all the way over the hill into this guy who has like a weird brain monster in his basement, and like he's like a warlord, right? Because it's that T.S. Eliot thing of like what's the thing you live the monster you guys don't
monster slowly going towards Bethlehem.
Exactly.
Do you become the monster after a certain amount of time or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Wait,
is that just?
I was about to say you're close to Batman.
Yeah, it's Batman.
T.S. Eliot, Batman, basically the same.
You live long enough to see yourself become the villain. That's extremely funny. Yes, good job, Nolan. Thank you. Just the Dark Knight for Heath Ledger's performance alone. I think Saw Gerrera is a really good example of how canny Star Wars can be with that stuff. And then I think you look at someone take Hux, for example. Hux as a character is almost impossible to imagine before already buying into the First Order as like an instrument of control. It's very difficult to look at him and be like, yes, I understand how this person bought into this ideology. Or to what Eric was talking about, I understand how this person started doing these things because they were trying to protect someone to do the right thing. And then, it's like with Bush Jr. at the time, when the prequels were coming out, where if you have to keep, you start doing something for the right reasons, but then to get that position of power where you can start to make change, if you have to keep doing worse and worse things, then that position, when you achieve it, is not a good position. That's a bad position. And I think that's... yes, exactly. And Sora is very much in that similar position. And so I wonder if part of the problem with the First Order is it's very difficult to... And perhaps from a... perhaps the novelizations help this, but, I think as I understand it, I find it quite difficult to look at these characters and go, I understand how you got yourself into this situation. Whereas even with the prequels and their politics, which I find quite compelling, most of those characters you go, oh, I see how you got here. Like, that initial conversation with the Trade Federation where, they're kind of being like strong-armed by Palpatine. We have to do that for that one scene at some point. That's a really interesting scene where he basically strong-arms them into doing something they kind of don't want to do. And it's not just because they're afraid of the Jedi. They're like, this has gone too far. Like, this was not part of the plan. But they're already, it's in for a penny and for a pound at that point,
So there was something you may have said this and all of that because I got lost in a thought. But like the one of the issues, if we're comparing directly Palpatine with the First Order, is if you think about motivation and what they're going to do with the power that they get. So Palpatine, his motivation isn't really about controlling the galaxy. Like, yes, he wants power and everything because he's a Sith and that's what Sith do. But ultimately, all of this is just a mechanism, or what he's really trying to do is to wipe out the Jedi. It's the revenge of the Sith, right? So that is what his goal is. It's not necessarily to achieve power, but he achieves power to do this thing. Once he's done it, he's like, all right, well, I guess I'm in charge. And, and that's sort of like that he just sort of exists. Like, it's one of those things where you look at, or you go, well, what's the motivation for the Empire? It's like, well, they're in power, and their motivation is they want to stay in power. It's very simple. So that's all you need to motivate the bad guys in 4, 5, and 6. So if you think about the First Order, they are not in power. They want to be in power. Why do they want to be in power? And what do they want to do with that power? Because they're not Palpatine. They're not going up against the Jedi. Like, if you think about everything that Hux says, it's essentially, it's like we're gonna wipe away the stain of the New Republic and everybody will bow to the First Order. It's like, okay, why? What do you not have that you want, and what are you going to do with that? Like, it's like if it would be very different if they were like, the Republic is weak and ineffectual and they are a threat to the galaxy and we're gonna wipe them out and bring order back to the galaxy. It's in our name. But they don't have any of that. They don't have an ideology.
Have the new shows or movies brought in anything about the Yuuzhan Vong? No.
No, they don't exist in canon.
I love that explanation. I don't know if you guys have talked about this.
Yeah.
It gives a reason.
I hate it so much, but
it's at least, and I think it's forced, but at least it's an explanation, right? Of, oh, I'm going to do atrocities because I had a vision that a giant alien race is going to come conquer all of us if we don't have a strong military presence. Okay, well, that's he did it, and they had a strong military presence, but then he got killed, and then things happen. But I agree with you completely. Like, there's no unified vision besides we want control. I don't know what they want at the end of the day. I don't know what they want the universe to look like. It's just, we don't like the guys who are in charge. We think they shouldn't have killed our guy who was in charge. So we want to be in charge now.
It's kind of an interesting thought that if the Yuuzhan Vong thing wasn't happening, then Palpatine didn't actually need this huge army. And he could have gotten, like, quote unquote, unlimited power just being the Supreme Chancellor without needing to build up this army.
Well, but I actually think it's really cool if that motivation doesn't exist and they'd actually plan for Palpatine to be behind all of this the whole time. I know that they can lie and say they did, but I've seen that film. I know that y'all didn't know that he was behind it all. If he was behind it all the whole time, there's actually a more compelling reading, which is he tastes when he's emperor, right? He gets a taste for this all-consuming power. He has this, like, this brief period where he has this unkillable golem that he's able to order around to slay his political enemies. He has control of the entire empire. He has armies that are like disposable. He's kidnapping kids. He's doing all of the fascist stuff, right? He's the guy. And in the same way that, and I know I'm biting this bit from somebody, and I think it's Austin Walker, but it's like in Heist when Danny DeVito is playing Bergman, and he's like overcome with this like outburst where he goes like, they're talking about money, and he goes, everybody needs money. That's why they call it money. And it's this like, he's so consumed by it that he can't, he imagines the thing unto itself. Like, that's how consumed he is by it. And that's what Palpatine does at the end of that last film when he's like, when he just bursts out with like power, unlimited power. Like, it's a dumb thing to say, but he's so consumed by the idea of power that in his head, power produces power, and power is valuable because it's power. And I think you could write a version of Palpatine as the primary force of antagonism, whether he's on screen or not, in that sequel trilogy, that has had that taste of power, and it has driven him into this consumed mania, and that's his motivation to build up these structures. And then you could look at the political throughputs of what a leadership person, what in your organization, what an SLT member consumed by that would do, and how that would influence the ideology of the organization you're building, and then the subsequent, government, the fascistic nation that is produced out of that. I think you could do that and have that be interesting without that nonsense word you guys kept saying with the ancient space alien outside guys. Like, I think there's something interesting there. Yeah, for sure. Definitely a real word. I think that could be interesting to me. I just, again, there's no planning gone into this sequel trilogy, so it's like just not, it's not in the text, but I could see a preferred reading for me working backwards from knowing that is Palpatine's final position. I could kind of make those films more interesting for myself and more work better for myself, because then you could start to look at, well, why is the First Order so vacant of ideology? Is it because this time Palpatine just didn't think it through? Because he's in this position, you know what I mean? Like, you can start to get there. I'm not advocating for that as a position. I'm just saying I can see that reading.
I keep thinking about the difference between the Empire and the First Order, and the lack of cult of personality that there is in the First Order. They have, got Hux, who is a mouse man, and frankly, I don't think anybody likes him, and that's the point. But
I don't think he likes him.
Yeah,
like, you know what I mean?
He's the guy that is fun to make fun of, and like they did a very good job. Like, casting, acting, that was very good. Nobody likes that guy. He's fun to make fun of, and I the only way that Palpatine was able to get to power was by having people believe in him, and not necessarily in a obtrusive, like, I'm going to make strong speeches kind of way, but almost in a very, he's the safe bet, and he continues to be the safe bet the entire time until he's the only one that's left, and he's the safest bet to make, and so everything hinges upon him. And the First Order, again, we don't have that. We just have a military presence that is commanded by an unseen force, and everybody who is outward facing isn't particularly charismatic, which from my experience is just not something that happens. Like, I do not know who is a part of this organization. You have like 3 people at the head. How are they paying their bills? Who is a part of them? Who supports them? Why are they being supported? There's absolutely no reason. Like, you can make a good argument for why people were behind Palpatine, right? You are being attacked by droids. Actively, they are shooting your people. Okay, he created an army. Yeah, let's go kill those droids. Here we go. But the First Order has absolutely no reason to have any support, any money, any resources whatsoever.
The other thing that I would tack onto that is that the real leader of the First Order is Snoke. And where the hell did he come from? And how does he rise? First of all, where does he come from? And second of all, how does he rise to be leader of this organization?
Yeah, why are people listening to this guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, does he just have a really good CV, do you think? He'd like have led armies before, have crushed galaxies before, but like he's like one of those guys where it's like references on on request, hoping that you don't check to see that he's done any of that before.
The Emperor, like I don't know, it seems legit.
It's signed Palpatine.
Have I ever talked to you guys about when I'm arguing with people on the internet, and a word that people like to throw around a lot is mental gymnastics. Mm-hmm. Have I talked to you about that?
But I used that earlier in our conversation, so I'm interested.
No, that's fine because you're probably using it correctly. Because it hasn't jumped out at me that you've been using it incorrectly. But I see people, a lot of sequel defenders that I argue with, and they're like, "Oh, you're doing mental gymnastics or whatever," and I'm like, "No, you're doing mental gymnastics."
I'm just thinking.
Like, I'm extrapolating from something, and if and I forget who this is, it's the guy that you don't like, Brandon Sanderson, I think, where he's like, where he talks about how
fuck off, Eric.
where
it's a drive-by.
where he's essentially, or I think he says, if you set up a thing, you don't have to like build out your whole iceberg of whatever, but if you set it up so that things follow, like if you set it up in such a way that you can think out logically and extrapolate what would be there, and then maybe later on in your story you actually do that, and it is what your reader imagined it to be, then you did the first part right. So that's one of those things. But like where I was trying to talk to this guy about mental gymnastics, where he's like, it's mental gymnastics, and I was like, no, it's very clearly I'm thinking if this, then this, and what you're saying is like where we talk about like where the hell did Snoke come from? You're like, well, the answer to that is answered in The Rise of Skywalker because he was a clone. I'm like, okay, so let's say he was cloned and he just shows up one day and is like, I'm a weird looking dude. I've got this scar on my face and I've got force powers. Let me be in charge. And everybody was just like, okay, that would never happen. Like, I mean, you can say like, all right, well, he like killed everybody, but how does he even get close to the leadership in that case? Like,
okay, he has like 6 acolytes.
You have to make.
Yeah, it's not the.
Yeah, you have to make too many, not inferences, but you have to fill in too many blanks to get from A to I guess A to Z in this case. Yeah, A to Snoke. Like there are so many things that you have to like try to figure out for yourself and go, well, obviously like this happened, and it's like, well, that doesn't logically follow.
Also, I haven't complained about this on the internet yet, so I'm going to do it now. I really liked when they first showed Snoke and he's a hologram and he's like a story tall.
Enormous.
He's so big. Yeah. And I really wanted him to stay that big. I thought that would have been so cool. You know, you actually go meet this guy in person and he's a freaking giant. We haven't seen that before. And it could have been the kind of thing where you think it's just for the hologram because he wants to feel full of himself and like he's bigger than everybody else. And then you go and meet him and he's like, oh no, dude's actually just a giant. It's
the opposite. He's like 2 inches
and he's so
tall.
small. Yeah, I'm just saying, like, there's an opportunity there. It's an infinite universe with infinite possibilities. He could have been a giant.
Damn. Yeah, and then he could have squished. He could have just stepped on you if you did something wrong. You know what I mean?
Then they could get the comes up through his foot and just
get that physic. You cut his leg off and he's got rings like a tree. You know what I mean?
There's something else I want to say is following on from what you had said before, and then that part about how the heck would Snoke come to be in charge of this organization? Like you could have that same question at the end of Return of the Jedi or in Empire Strikes Back. Whenever we first beat Palpatine, it's like, how did this guy get to be the Emperor? This creepy, wrinkled old dude who like spent too long in the bath. Like, how does he become in charge? And then you go and you have the prequels and it goes, that makes sense. He was a normal looking dude and he got messed up by Mace Windu, and then he goes out there in front of everybody and it's like, look what they did to me. These guys are a threat. And it's just it fits perfectly that you go, okay, that totally makes sense. That weird looking dude would be the one in charge.
Again,
it helps that he was already established.
Yeah, and they just had to make it make sense, right? I remember being a kid and asking my dad, like, why does he look like that though? And Dad just going, because we didn't have the prequels at that point. Dad just went, because he's super evil.
Which is the correct answer. Yeah.
No, I mean,
sometimes evil guys just be looking evil.
I guess what I'm saying is you don't need that, but we have it, and it totally works.
Yes. No. Sorry, I do follow logically. I guess my question then is, like, Snoke is so impossible. Like, he's so impossible that I almost think, like, to what Eric was talking about before with, like, having a charismatic leader, like, there's just no one that you go, oh yes, they're the obvious leader of the First Order, right? Like, Kylo Ren is occupying the role of the Golem character. He can't be, Golem, not Golem. He can't be the face of the Order until he decides to be later. Hux can't be because no one likes Hux. Snoke can't be because he looks like that. Like, there's just, and this is where I think Bloodline really, like, approaches something interesting, which is, like, the ransom dude. What's his last name, Rye?
Casturfo.
Yeah,
Ransom Casturfo.
He could be a legitimate inheritor of the Empire and produce the First Order. He's charismatic. People like him. He's well educated. He's well spoken, and he's able to produce the ideology of the Empire, but through the aesthetics of being for the, for the better good and for helping people. Right? He's kind of the guy who has the juice to do it, but that person just doesn't exist in the films. Like, there just isn't a person where you go, and even if they'd done like a strawman senator or something who they press ganged into doing it, like, there's so many options of how you could do it. And that would also give you avenues to explain things like, hey, how are they funded, right? One of the coolest things about Andor is, like, Mon Mothma funding, like, the rebels, and how difficult that actually is to move money around. And, she has to get some shady dude from her past involved, and it starts to threaten her marriage, which is already the most toxic, weird thing. Like, they actually contend with those things as material realities of these institutions being produced. And I feel like the sequel trilogy just goes, I don't know, they just spawned yesterday. We went into the menu and we picked the First Order, and then we picked big evil. It's the Death Star but bigger, and they went spawn, and it just went boop. Like, it all has that quality to it, where it all feels at a storytelling level, it has the quality of a video game rendering engine, where it's only when you look at it does it come into existence. And when you stop looking at it, it vanishes.
The more that I think about it, the more that I think that the way that they actually built the First Order is not a legitimate government. It is a terrorist cell. And you just have a few people who are zealots and are, kind of dumb. And they're being led along by this shadowy individual. And it's not an entire force. It's not an entire government. It's just like a few guys who figured out how to, for lack of a better thing, they figured out how to hijack a plane. Like, that's what they did. And they figured out how to create mass chaos based on one event. And it is not what they built it into. It is not this entire government and leadership that was able to come in. It was just a few guys that did a very bad thing and were able to blow up the Senate in this case, but then they kind of don't have anything left. They have no central leadership, they have no central base, and they do not represent any civilization, army, or planet. They are just a few zealots.
And the army they do have was all kidnapped kids.
Yeah.
Who were indoctrinated and raised in that. So
just
it's not like
child
they were the
soldiers,
clones who,
And
like,
again,
believed in their cause.
So you allow that, but it's going to be a small army. Like, you can't have mass numbers doing that.
It's really weird. Are you guys describing Star Wars or America? It's really weird.
Hang on.
Hang on a minute. Wait a second. A small number of zealots who managed to sneak their way in charge and are using it to produce mass chaos and kill people to get rich?
They were farmers, all right?
Is that what we're talking about? With the military that doesn't really want to fight? Is that we're talking about Star Wars or America? Am I right?
So I do want to throw in something here before people start adding you, David. But
okay, the bit's over. I'll leave it. Sorry.
No, not even about that. But actually, Hux is the only one. Well, actually, no, that's not true. Because you have the the Trinity at the top of the First Order is Snoke, and then Kylo, and then Hux. Those are the three people in power. Snoke is actually, I think, the one who makes the least sense, as we've discussed. Kylo makes sense, as you put it, because he's the Golem. He is essentially just a tool, in many senses of the word.
Got him.
And because he's a Force user, he's a strong Force user, and there would be a role for somebody like that. He's not necessarily in charge of anything, but he's like, he's the hand of Snoke or whatever, or something like that. There is a role for that. It would him being in the position that he's in makes sense. Hux also makes sense, not because of the well, it doesn't make sense because of all the stuff that you said. Or I think he would be a person that would struggle to remain in that position, but the way that he gets in that position is because it's his father who leads the Empire remnants. I want to say that leads the Empire remnants into the unknown territory and allows them to continue to exist.
He's the Nepo baby?
Yes. Oh. I think his dad is Brendel Hux, I want to say.
Oh, yeah.
Familiar.
Big Brendel. Yeah.
Big B. Yeah.
It does sound right. Yeah. You'll know Big B. Yeah, that's the homie.
Oh, man. And so your statement made me realize that they were trying to recreate Vader and Tarkin and the Emperor. And
yes,
that in New Hope, like, it's not Vader who orders the Death Star. It's not Vader who's ordering Leia. It's Tarkin who's leading everything. But it's Tarkin, and he's awesome. And he's this Force, and he's obviously in control. And when Vader starts Force joking people, he's like, Vader, stop it. Come on, what are you doing? And then we have Hux, who is... Yeah, I know, I'm making great points. You have Hux, who does not have that same kind of command or control. And what I really wonder is, was this done on purpose by the filmmakers in order to juxtapose between what Hux and Tarkin are, or was this a lazy decision to create an unlikable character in order that we can center more on who Kylo Ren is and his own development? Because Hux is never going to develop into anything.
I think it's a common prequel L, is my feeling. Like, this is just the same kind of mistake that is made across the length of those films, where they understand schematically what they're trying to do. They're like, okay, Star Wars, like you said, Star Wars had these elements. And so when we do Star Wars, it'll have these elements, but with a twist, right? Like, it seems to think that is sufficient to be interesting. And maybe the way to say it is, like, I think it's aesthetically thinking about the right stuff, but it doesn't seem to understand why that schema worked in the first place, which is what you just said, which is the cool thing about Star Wars, the original trilogy, is Vader is the boogeyman that you're scared of, but he takes marching orders from this fucking guy, and this guy is the 2IC of the guy in charge. He's not even part of the C-suite. He's just like, he's a freelancer to an extent. And there's a cool kind of way that makes him even scarier, because he might even turn on the bad guys at some point. You don't know what it gives him an element of chaos and an element of, and that's what makes it so, feasible and believable when he's like talking to Luke and he's like, listen, like, these aren't even my guys. Like, we could turn on them and do this together. Like, it actually sucks. It actually sucks working for these guys. They won't let me join the freaking council. Okay, like, they made me a master, but they won't let me join the council. Can you believe that? Like, that's the story of Anakin's entire life.
So, like, what am I supposed to do now?
That's the story of his entire life, is always being on the outs. And, like, even this, where he's the guy who said, I can help you save your wife, I can make you powerful, we can rule the galaxy together. Even with that guy, when he does everything he's told, he's still on the outs. And that's why it's so believable when, Luke shows up and he's like, oh shit, this is my kid. Like, maybe this is an opportunity for me to finally be on the ins with somebody for the first time in my entire life, right? And yeah, I don't think that the resonance exists with Kylo Ren and Hux and Snoke, because Hux is like ultimately he's a punchline. he's not a fully formed character, and nor is a Snoke fully formed character, and nor does Kylo's full formation feel real. How would you say it? Well choreographed, right? I'm thinking about the ways that people dislike his origins in The Last Jedi. I think that's the real failure of the usage of that kind of trio of characters, in my opinion.
All right, let's do final thoughts because we need to get this guy to bed, and David probably needs to go back to work. Maybe?
Yeah, or to bed. Like we got options. Like I gotta have a wee kip.
Rye, any final thoughts?
I think they left a lot on the table. It could have been a very interesting. It could have been very interesting the way that they introduced the First Order, what they wanted, their ideology, their origin, etc. All of that could have been a huge struggle for Leia, especially, to go up against, and probably Luke as well. That all, and not being able to overcome the bureaucracy of the New Republic, or the New Republic's not wanting, or just being susceptible to that don't look up thing, of not wanting to accept that this was a threat. Like, all of that could have been very interesting. A lot of that interesting stuff is in Bloodline, and if you care about this, you should read it, or at least half of it. You could skip everything where they're going after the racketeer or whatever, but like everything else is very interesting. Yeah, so I think it was a huge missed opportunity, and what we end up getting doesn't really make a lot of sense.
David.
There's no way where I say something really inflammatory to get like engagement, especially given it's a sequel conversation. I don't have anything in the chamber. I normally mentally prepare as we're going through. I think my final thoughts, just to tie it all together, is I think that when we're considering how we put stories together and we're considering what elements we use, particularly in continuous fiction, I think it's important to not just identify aesthetics and schematics that are deployed, but try to understand the preferred readings and the potential readings and the meanings that are produced by those things, like Rye was talking about, where you put this thing in there and then this thing, then that thing. Oh, but what could this mean, right? You get that productive ambiguity. I think it's of incredible importance for these stories to engage with themselves seriously, and the sequel trilogy does not. The sequel trilogy is a Star Wars themed amusement ride, whereas Andor is a show that cares about Star Wars and engages with it in every way possible. And I think the characters in a story don't necessarily have to take their situation seriously, but you have to take contending with creating a story seriously, especially if you want people to take it seriously as a story. And the sequel trilogy just doesn't do that. And it ends up feeling lazy and kind of silly, and ultimately forgettable, which I think is the worst crime of all.
Okay. I'm doing a sign off. You do a bit, and I'm gonna take them away.
I don't know how to turn off the
You
camera.
don't need to turn it. give your final thoughts. Tell them goodbye, and just clicky right here to see David, and then back there to see you.
Okay, I don't need to see myself, so I'm going to see David, I guess. Yeah, there we go.
Oh no, great.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. So I'll watch you and your facial expressions as I talk. I can think my favorite things from the conversation were there should be no throwaway characters. You know, if you're going to write somebody, at least write them with the expectation that they have a fully fulfilled backstory that is just not being seen in the course of this film, right? Like that's, if you are trying to recreate the magic that happened in a previous film, you can't just go one for one on numbers. Say there were 3 before, there's got to be 3 over here. You know, you have to understand the chemistry and the dynamic that went into the actual relationship between them and why that worked. You could say the same thing between the like Leia, Luke, Han relationship. Like they use trios a lot. The trios are really easy tension and dynamic to happen. So I think having no throwaway scenes, having no throwaway characters, having everybody think there's more here that we just don't have time to see. There's a conversation that's going on here in the background. Then we're just coming in chapter 2 of this story, and now we're just along for the ride. And I think that's something that the sequel trilogy has not done a very good job of leading us into, because what we come into in chapter 2 of the ride for the First Order is an organization that makes no sense, has far more power than they ever should without a strong leader or any set goals. And therefore, everybody has problems with those movies, and it's, I don't know, maybe they'll get it better in the next 3.
God, I keep forgetting they're doing more.
I mean, it's inevitable, right? Like, as someday somebody's going to take over, and it's going to keep going, just like Disney.
But before we go, there was a little something in there that you said that I thought was just brilliant, which is the idea of if you think about like Lord of the Rings and the extended editions of Lord of the Rings, it's like there's more, or Rings of Power or something like that, is that there's more to that story than we get in those movies that we want to see. And versus this, where there's more to the story of this that we need to see because what we have doesn't make sense by itself.
Yes. That is the definition of productive ambiguity, right? Where you want to see more, but you don't need it because you've been able to figure out what is going on, right? The best examples of that came out of like the 80s sci-fi movement, obviously in the wake of Star Wars and Cyberpunk, where these authors on purpose were being like, hey, you're not going to understand everything that's going on, but we're going to give you exactly what you need to make your way through the story and feel what needs to be felt, to have things land and be resonant. And if you want to, you can sit down and go, hey, wait a minute. What was that thing that was described that was really weird and that I couldn't put together? And like, I think the best reviews that you can get, or the best feedback you can get on a project in speculative fiction, is where someone finishes it and they go, oh my God, that was awesome. I wish I knew more about the world. Because that means you've nailed that. And anytime that you finish a book and you go, yeah, I feel like I had a full meal, I feel like that's always a sign that like maybe you didn't quite nail that balancing act, is my feeling.
When it comes to incomplete like ideas, I don't know, I started thinking about character and storyline are so different. You know, you can have world building and character where there's ambiguity. All right. Oh, he's messed up. What got him here? I don't need to see that in this story. That's a different story. They definitely have some trauma in their background. That's fine. But plot doesn't follow that same rule. Plot has to be explained, and we need to know why this happened, and it has to make sense. It has to add up.
Yeah, exactly. I think something that we often talk about in that regard, to kind of put a button on that, is it's not just that plot has to make sense. It's that something that Rye said before, which is that it has to logically follow, at least in the context of the story, even if the things that are making A, B, then C, then D happen aren't motivated by logic, right? Characters can act irrationally, but as long as we understand the motivation, the input, and the output, we can kind of follow. And certainly the sequel trilogy struggles with that almost at every turn, as it tries to stitch together a broader narrative. Now, I'm assuming that Darth isn't here, so I will prompt you guys for sign-off stuff. Eric, do you have anything to plug? Where can people find you on the internet? Where can they find your books? What's the best place to point people toward, if there is one?
So right now, I'm taking a break from Twitter. I refuse to use its other name. And I am technically on Blue Sky, and I am just an old-fashioned email. esandersonauthor@gmail.com. And I have a book still in beta editing from the very good beta edits that I'm very excited about that I am doing. And so once that comes out, I'll talk more about it. But that's where I am.
Excellent. Ryan, what about you? Anything in the chamber at the moment, or just BAU cruising along?
I'm just cruising at the moment.
He's just cruising like a dreadnought. There, I did it. Full circle, baby. Y'all already know what it is. Darth on YouTube, Darth Podcast on YouTube. Follow if you like this. Leave a like, leave a comment below if there's something that you want to hear us talk about, or if you think that we got something wrong. We'd love to hear from you. Any feedback is good feedback. Go support Darth's channel in whatever way you can. There's a bunch of big essays coming up that we've been talking about behind the scenes, and these podcasts are a really good way to keep sparking ideas and keep things fresh. If you watch Darth, you probably already know who I am. ZeroIndent.com for everything I do. YouTube.com/ZeroIndent. Underink.press to find my books. All that stuff is in the links down below. Thanks so much for watching or listening. We will catch you guys in the next episode of That One Scene to talk about yet another scene. Yeah, that's it. Goodbye. What's the thing, Rye? Take us out with the thing.
It's either goodbye there or may the force be with you always.
Yeah, I love that one. Because it's how you end all your videos. My favorite. Yeah, I love it. Now, Eric, you don't know how to stop the recording, do you?
I have no idea. This may continue. Yes.
Yeah, maybe best not to touch anything in case you break it.
His mouse has more buttons than my mouse. I assume that's on purpose. Oh, wait, I do see a stop recording button.
Yeah, so that on OBS, there'll be a stop recording button, and then I'm assuming that he's recording audio separately in Audacity, maybe?
Yeah, that's probably happening. All right, I'm going to stop recording the one I see. And cheers. Good to see you guys.
Bye.